If you're an educator, and I'm guessing anyone watching this, many of you are educators, you know about the power of reflection, taking time to think about what worked, what didn't work, what do I need to do differently. And so I'm going to encourage you as another way to build connections and overcome this polarization we're experiencing, that radical brokenness, is to reflect on your practices. To take just a few minutes and look back over the day and say, how did I do? If you're focused on trying to improve listening, then you reflect on how your listening went. If you're working on building common ground, you think about the interactions and how did you find common ground. You can also keep a journal of different kinds of events that happen. How did you make connections? I did this thing, which sounds kind of goofy, but it's called a grumpy journal. And so I kept track of everything that kind of ticked me off. If I was feeling a little grumpy, I wrote about it. I kept it down, and I kept it in my little notebook that I carry around, my little moleskin. You could do it technologically too, I suppose. And just I take a couple of words, what was going on, and what was leading me to feel a little grumpy. The grumpy journal. And what I learned was pretty amazing, is that I don't like it when people block my path. And both literally and metaphorically. So if I'm trying to get a project moving forward and someone's slowing up the project, it makes me grumpy. But it's not just that. If I'm driving on the highway and somebody's going slow in the passing lane, I'm going to feel grumpy about it. And so recognizing that was really, really quite helpful. Now, since we're on the topic of grumpy, the other thing I'd like to say is to control your emotions. One of the most important things to do is to recognize that a stimulus does not necessarily lead to a response. To control anger, for example, you have to put a gap between stimulus and response. So for me, the grumpy journal, becoming aware of what it was that prompted me to feel a little bit stressed, was a way in which I could put a gap between stimulus and response. So if I'm trying to get through the grocery store and somebody's blocking my way and I start to feel this thing, I can go, oh, that's the thing, that's the trigger that makes me grumpy. And becoming aware of that puts a gap between stimulus and response. Now, it doesn't have to be that. You could be reflecting on your ability to connect with other people. And you think through your day's interactions with different people and say, how did I do in terms of connection? You could be reflecting on how well you listen in different conversations. Of course, if you really want to do it well, you could video record conversations and reflect on how they went. But to take time, maybe only 10 minutes at the end of the day, to pause and reflect and say, how am I doing as I move forward? I think that reflection time can be powerful in helping you build bridges, make connections, and move forward.